Hello, everyone. Rena here. It's time to talk about suffering, right? Last time we met on a Sunday night, our middle schoolers wrote down some awesome questions about God, and I promised we would answer them. If you look back at previous posts, I tried to answer a lot of them, at least partially, with some short answers on index cards. I'm not sure if I've ever created a video for social media before, but this topic is super close to my heart, and I really felt like I should talk to you about it more personally. Miss Elaine and I were actually gearing up to teach about this topic on a Sunday night this semester. It's become even more relevant in the past few weeks. I really hope we get to talk about this more in person this fall. But in the meantime, here are my thoughts on a really important question. Does God even care about our suffering? And if God cares and He's all powerful, why doesn't He stop our suffering? First of all, what exactly is suffering? Many times we only think of suffering as something that happens to other people. Tragic accidents, natural disasters, terminal cancer. We're tempted to think that our suffering doesn't count compared to what other people are going through. But for God, our struggles really do matter. Our suffering is real. Our frustration with our family, our sadness at not being able to go hang out with our friends, our anxiety about how long this will last. Jesus takes all of that and more onto the cross with Him. Jesus doesn't weigh our troubles against anyone else's troubles. Jesus weighs our troubles against His own infinite capacity to love us and to walk with us. Christ not only sees our problems as important, but for Him, we are loved and suffered with as if we are the only person in the entire world. This is the paradox of suffering. Our suffering is real and it matters, but it ultimately only makes sense as a part of the bigger story of salvation. I have heard some people suggest that the COVID-19 coronavirus is some kind of a punishment from God, but I don't believe that's how our God works. Sometimes I can trace my suffering back to something I did. Like if I eat a whole chocolate cake by myself, I'm gonna have a stomach ache. That's just a logical, natural consequence. Sometimes I can trace my suffering back to something someone else did on purpose, someone who intended to hurt me. Sometimes my suffering comes from someone who acted selfishly, not thinking about how their actions would affect me. But sometimes suffering just happens. We all know that bad things happen to people who don't deserve it all the time. Why does God allow that? How could a good God stand by as innocent people suffer? It's a true mystery. But I believe that the answer must have something to do with why Jesus, the ultimate innocent person, chose to accept death on a cross, a death reserved for criminals. It's not that God couldn't stop the crucifixion. Somehow Jesus' death on the cross shows us who God is in a way that nothing else could. At Christmas, we celebrate Jesus as God with us, God walking among us as an actual human being. In Lent and Holy Week, we take that a step further. We remember that Jesus isn't just with us. Jesus is with us to the point of death. And somehow, by going deeper into the reality of suffering than anyone else could, Jesus actually saves us. So what does all this mean for us today? Well, remember the story of Lazarus? Lazarus is dying. Jesus is on his way, but Lazarus dies before he arrives. Lazarus' sisters, Mary and Martha, are really upset. They ask why Jesus didn't hurry up so that he could prevent their brother's death. In response to Martha and Mary, Jesus does two things. First, he reminds them that their brother will be raised again. And then, Jesus weeps over Lazarus' death. He brings them hope, and then he truly mourns with them. Even though he knows that Lazarus will live again, Jesus grieves alongside Mary and Martha. He's not distant from the situation. He's not pretending. He loves Lazarus and his sisters very much, and he is deeply involved. Lazarus' death is real, and it matters to Jesus. It's only after Jesus has wept that he brings Lazarus back to life. He doesn't wave a magic wand to make things the way they were before. Instead, he enters into his friend's sorrow and then he transforms it into joy. It's tempting to jump straight to the lessons and the blessings that can come out of suffering. But Jesus shows us that when we're in the middle of the sorrow of Good Friday, we can't just jump to the joy of Easter Sunday without going through the uncertainty and the darkness of the tomb. The cross is real, and the resurrection only makes sense if we take the cross seriously. But we are never alone with our crosses, because Jesus is right there beside us every step of the way. One last thing. After Jesus raises Lazarus, he does something kind of strange. Instead of unwrapping Lazarus from his burial cloths himself, Jesus tells the people around him to untie Lazarus and let him go. Jesus could do it himself, but he chooses to involve other people. In our own lives, especially now, Jesus is telling us the same thing. Jesus will do the things only God can do, but he is inviting you to help others by doing the things that only you can do. That starts with our families, our friends, and our neighbors, and extends to the global community. We are part of God's answer to suffering. We are called to participate in God's work. God is always bringing great good out of really bad things. So what great good is God going to bring out of this crisis with your help? I can't wait to see.